Joining me next on the program is Oliver Inderwildi. He comes to us from the Smith School of Enterprise and Environment at Oxford University. And Professor, the UK has been at the forefront this year of warning over the coming energy crunch. You had at the beginning of the year the UK Energy Research Centre. February, you had the UK Task Force. March, your Smith School had a report. And then more recently, in the month of June, Chatham House issued a report with Lloyd's. The message of all your reports is business and government is underestimating catastrophic consequences of declining oil production. Professor, why do you think it's the UK?
I think there are several reasons. For instance, the UK, in the gas sector, the UK was a net gas exporter a couple of years ago. Meanwhile, we were a net importer. And this winter, which was a pretty tough winter in the United Kingdom, we had gas supply shortages. So it was difficult to keep supply up to meet demand. And I think that was one of the wake-up calls, that why more and more people are thinking about energy, efficient use of energy, and resource scarcity. And additionally, we have quite a few research institutions that includes Oxford University and the Smith School, and also the Royal Institute of International Affairs, so the Chatham House report you just mentioned, who are working on these issues. And I think that's why this came up very early in the UK discussion.
You know, one of the key findings in your report was that a lot of the reserve data that's available in the public domain is often contradictory. I wonder if you might explain why that is in the problem that it creates.
Mm-hmm. For instance, many reporting agencies, when they assess the world oil inventory, do not distinguish between grades of oil. So we would think of conventional oil as oil that is liquid at temperatures on the surface. However, if you look at heavy oils or tar sands, then these are not liquid, and we would classify them as unconventional oils. The reason for them being unconventional is it's very energy intensive to produce them, and additionally you need copious amounts of water to produce them, which puts pressure on a scarce resource, namely water, and increases emissions from those fuels. So we have them in a different pigeonhole to the regular crude oil that we pump out of the ground, for instance, in Saudi Arabia. And if you withdraw all those unconventional fuels from the world oil inventory, then the picture looks very, very different. And usually reporting agencies come to more than 1,000 gigabarrels, while we think this should be downgraded to about 800 gigabarrels in the world oil inventory.
Yeah, that was my next question, because one of the aspects of your report when you came to the conclusions is that oil reserves globally are overstated. Most experts, you listed a couple estimates out there, but they range from 1.2 trillion barrels to 1.4 trillion barrels. And so if they're revised downward, as you suggest, by $300 to $400 billion, you know, it tells us, Professor, that we're very, very close to the peak, because I think we've produced over 1 trillion barrels, and our original estimate was a little over 2 trillion. So if we're going to revise those estimates down by 300 to 400 billion barrels, it tells us that, the peak is much closer than most people think.
Absolutely. And I think it's tough to put a year on the exact peak. However, we definitely think that we meet the peak in this decade. So before 2020, likely somewhere around middle of the decade. And there are additional factors that will enhance this. For instance, the moratoria that are called for deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and also in the North Sea will definitely enhance that effect. And also the recent announcement by King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia to hold exploration in Saudi Arabia will get us quicker to peak oil.
You know, your own study, and I've seen the UK Task Force, the UK Energy Research Centre, the Lloyd's report, seem to paint a problematic picture beginning in 2010 to 2015 with, as you just mentioned, that the peak is probably somewhere close to mid-decade. And the only way that we can avoid this problem is if demand falls as much or in parallel with supply such as what we've got, for example, in the recession.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what we have to do. We have to treat oil as a scarce resource, which we have to make efficient use of the scarce resource. Blowing out more and more will harm us on the medium to long run. We're pumping out faster than it's possible. If you look at the estimates for global oil demand, for instance, from the International Energy Agency in Paris, you can see that these are going up. The International Energy Agency estimates that much of this increase in demand will be satisfied by additional production in Saudi Arabia. But as I just said, King Abdullah just announced that he is not going to produce more than 10 million barrels per day and not export more than 8.5 million barrels a day. So the production and the export from Saudi Arabia will be constant. Additionally, we have this moratoria due to the recent disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. So essentially we have a stagnating or slightly declining production and at the same time an increasing demand. And all this will get us to the peak a lot quicker. So it will definitely be tough to keep supply at the same level and demand over the next couple of years.
You know, right now, Professor, a lot of the policy officials are concerned with a contracting private sector, falling demand, which is being countered by government stimulus programs, central bank liquidity injections. However, it seems to me all economic growth is dependent on the production of energy. So it seems to me one factor governments aren't really focusing on is the role that oil prices and energy prices will have a greater influence on macro policy going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Economic growth and energy consumption are linked. However, we can, by using our scarce resources more efficiently, we can have the same economic growth and consume less of our resources. And there are a few good examples for this. Japan, for instance, a resource-poor country, and their energy efficiency is at the top of the agenda of the government. And by making use of energy efficiently, you can sustain economic growth while stagnating energy consumption and hence resource consumption.
You know, Professor, maybe one reason why we've seen some complacency, an issue that you've talked about in your report, is there's almost an intentional misreporting when it comes to reserve figures, and much of it is contradictory. For example, in the public domain, we consistently see reports that increase annual reserves each year, despite simultaneous reporting that consumption has exceeded additional discoveries in terms of volumes of conventional oil. And so perhaps it's this increase in reserves that you see get reported in the BP statistical review or the IEA that lulls us into complacency that we have much more time than we actually have.
I completely agree. You're raising a really good point here. The problem is that these reviews include more and more of the so-called unconventional oil reserves into the global oil inventory. However, we think that's not the right way because these are more environmentally harmful than other reserves. And also, there's more and more ultra-deep water oil included in those estimates. And ultra-deep water drilling is a profitable but also very risky business, as we all know meanwhile. So we really think that we should downgrade the world oil inventory and only consider conventional resources in it. The problem with that is we also don't want to provoke any